Hello Couch Detectives, it's Caroline Mitchell here. I'm an ex-police detective and crime thriller author, and today I'm bringing you the creepy true life case of the boy in the walls. If you like listening to true crime cases, you won't want to miss this one. So it's 1986 and we go to the small town in Massachusetts, the home of Annie and Jessica Andrews and their dad Brian. This family have had a horrific time of it, and Annie and Jessica have just lost their mum very suddenly to cancer. Their dad Brian is lost, as you'd imagine, having become a single father overnight. He's working long hours to care for his kids, but sadly they sometimes find themselves alone. And it's because of all of this whirlwind of emotions that the girls have turned to Ouija boards to help them cope with their loss and the grief that has been thrust upon them. Now, Ouija boards are always a bad idea in my opinion. I guess the girls were just trying to find some comfort in trying to contact their mum. So they take their Ouija board and they go to the basement, bringing a few of her things, some candles, and they start to communicate. But after a while, there's no response, and the girls give up and go to bed. Their dad would not approve anyway, and they say nothing more about it. That is until the tapping starts in the walls at night. And it seems to come from behind the walls, and the girls are scared and maybe a little bit curious, and they wonder if the Ouija board had started it off. Maybe their mum was responding to them. Maybe she was trying to get through. So the girls start to communicate, and the taps answer in yes and no's. But the tapping gets louder, sometimes keeping them awake at night. It becomes insistent, kind of wanting their attention all the time. And things start moving in the house, all by themselves. They'd go out of a room, and then they'd come back to find items had been moved, but no one had come into the house. The girls get scared, and they confide in their dad, and he's not happy. He tells them to stop messing about. He guesses that they're trying to cope with the grief of their mum's sudden loss, and he tells them if things don't improve, that he will rightfully send them to counselling. So the girls decide to keep their experiences to themselves. It's clear their dad doesn't believe them. They think they're just using it maybe for attention or their own way of dealing with things. So they say nothing, but things get worse. So one evening the girls are alone in the house when they hear this loud tapping, but it's not coming from the walls this time. It's coming from the floors, or at least the basement, and they get scared. If you were in their shoes, what would you do? Would you run for the hills, or would you go to explore? Oh, the thoughts are going down into creepy basements. I'm sure glad we don't have one. But the girls want to find out who it is. It's been going on for ages, and they need to know if someone's in their home. So they grab a knife and they slowly creep down to the basement. Their breath becomes shallow as they listen for every sound. They're scared, but equally they want to know where this noise is coming from, until one of the sisters calls, "Look at the wall." Her eyes are wide, and she stares at this writing, which seems to be in blood. "Come find me," it says. "I'm in your closet." And with that, the girls scream, rush up the steps, rush out of that house, and run to the neighbours. Their dad comes to find them, wondering what the hell has been going on. They tell him, and he goes back to the house with them, but he doesn't believe that it was an intruder. He tells them not to be messing about. He looks at the writing, it's ketchup, and he instantly thinks the girls are just messing about. So he does send them to counselling. So weeks later, the tapping starts again in Annie's room, and the girls walk in and they see letters scrawled on her bedroom wall saying, "I'm back, find me if you can." And like the last time, they just left the building, which was the right thing to do. They ran out and they ran to the neighbours, and again they waited for their dad to come home. They knew he'd be mad, they knew he wouldn't be happy with them, but what else could they do? So they waited. The dad came home and he said, "Right, I've had enough of this. I'm going to that house. I'm going to sort this out once and for all." But when he got there, the house was ransacked. The telly was really loud, and he knew the girls wouldn't have left it like that. And everything was just upside down. So he went up the stairs to Annie's bedroom, and when he got there, he saw the red words scrawled on her wall, "Marry me." And as if that wasn't bad enough, he looked at the closet, and there was a man standing there, holding a hatchet, staring right at him. Now, at this point of the story, they vary. It's a bit of an urban legend at this point. It's a true story, but parts of it differ online. Some people say the man was wearing a blonde wig, dressed in his wife's clothes. I've researched this and I'm not sure that part of it's true. I think that's an embellishment. But, you know, isn't it bad enough that there's some weird guy in a wardrobe holding a hatchet, staring right at you? So Brian tries to catch him, you know, defending his family, and this guy just rushes past him and runs out the door. And Brian is completely freaked out now. He's like, what the hell has been going on? He calls 911, the police come round and they give him safeguarding advice. When you're a police officer and you arrive at something like this, all sorts of thoughts go through your mind. But the main things are that you rely on your training, you're professional. You keep any personal judgments to yourself, you work out the risk assessment first, and that's the most important thing. So you assess this situation. Often before you get there, you'll see if there's any intel, any background checks, and the call handler can usually do that for you. They're telling you in your earpiece as you're arriving to the scene. The call takers are great and they're trained to listen to as much as they can, even stuff going on in the background, as they try and gauge the level of risk for you, a police officer, going into a house and you don't know what's going on. When police searched Annie and Jessica's home, it was like something out of a horror movie. Apparently there was pennies glued to the ceiling and red writing all over the walls. But they can't find anyone in the house. And so he is given advice to maybe move out for a couple of weeks, go somewhere safe, and let things lie, and perhaps the invader will give up and not come back. So that's what they did. Brian took his girls and they went to stay with relatives for a couple of weeks. But after that, Brian thought, you know what, I'm not being driven out of my home. I'll look after my family. I'm going back there and I'm going to keep my girls safe. Now, I mean, can you imagine how badly Brian must have felt about not believing his girls before? It must have really played on his mind. And as well as that, he hadn't been keeping them safe. You know, they were telling them there's someone in the house. And next thing, there's a guy with a hatchet that could have been just as easily there for his girls. They could have been killed. So he's pissed and he goes home. But as he drives up the track towards the house, he sees a shadow in the window and he watches as a man walks past. It's the same guy who was in the wardrobe. He calls police, they surround the building and they go in. But he is nowhere to be found. I mean, what the heck? Is he being haunted? Is it the Ouija board? What the hell is going on with this house? But the officers don't give up, and one of them finds a crawl space behind the washer dryer. There's a piece of wood that seems loose and he pulls it out, and sure enough he finds Danny Laplante hidden behind the walls. I mean, that is everyone's worst nightmare, isn't it? Finding someone behind your walls. I was thinking about it last night when I was trying to sleep and I was, oh no, that's not a good situation. He had actually made little tunnels behind the walls and peepholes so he could see the girls and respond to their questions when they asked them. And fair play to the officer who managed to find the space behind a washer dryer in the kitchen. He's seen a piece of wood that looked odd. He pulled out the washer dryer and he found a crawl space. And behind it was Danny Laplante. Now, Daniel was just a teenager and he'd actually dated Annie, and he was stalking her without her even knowing it. He'd met Annie by calling the house a few times and ended up talking to the girls because he most likely probably knew they were on their own. And he had talked to Annie and he said that he knew her, he was from the local school, although she didn't recall him. He described himself as this handsome jock and asked her out on a date. But when he turned up at the house, he was not what he described. She said he was dirty, smelly, he had acne and he just hadn't washed. His hair could have done with a good wash, and he was really, really socially awkward and odd. But he asked her out and she didn't have the heart to say no. So she went out for him for a little while and got away as soon as she could, but not before Daniel had asked her all about her mum and how she died. I mean, talk about first date conversations. He didn't just want to know, how she passed. He wanted the really nitty gritty. He wanted the details of the light leaving her eyes, of what it felt like for Annie when she died before them. I mean, how horrible is that? This poor girl is grieving and he's getting off on this. So she made her excuses as soon as she could and she left. But little did she know that Daniel was not ready to leave it there. So he was living and breathing in the walls of their home, and Daniel's background was a harrowing one. By the time he was 17, he'd been sexually abused by 3 adults in his life. He was really badly neglected at home. He lived with his mum and his stepfather. His biological father sexually abused him. When he was in school, he was having such a hard time of it. I mean, can you imagine the bullies that must have been going on there? A lot of bullying because of his hygiene problems and his inability to form relationships or interact with people socially, that he was sent to the school psychiatrist, who ended up sexually abusing him as well. I mean, my God, the people in his life that were meant to care for him all abused and used him. It was no wonder he'd probably had serious trust issues. Now, believe me, I'm not condoning what he did. Far from it. Lots of people go through hell in their childhoods and manage to turn it around. I'm just giving you some background information on him. He was found to have been torturing animals. He practiced Satanism, and he had such a dark past. Anyway, Danny was sent to a Young Offenders Institute, and he wasn't there very long. Just a few months later, he was released, and his offending started up straight away. He was really into burglaries, and this is how a lot of offenders start off. Rapists sometimes start off as flashers or purse snatchers. They'll run up to a woman, grab her purse, and get such a thrill out of that. But then the level goes up, and as well as their justification and the fact that I got away with that, so what else can I get away with? And often is the case of burglaries. I mean, in this case that we're going to discuss shortly, that it progressed to, people say it was a burglary gone wrong. I completely disagree. It was elevated from a burglary onto something else. So Daniel still got a kick out breaking into people's houses, and in November 1987, he actually stole 2 handguns from a neighbour. So you can see now things are getting really serious. And he was most likely plotting for ages what he was about to do. Just a month later, Andrew Gustafsson rang his wife Priscilla, who was at home with their 2 children. So Priscilla was 3 months pregnant and at home caring for Abigail, their daughter, who was almost 8, and William, their son, who was 5. There was no reason why she wouldn't answer the phone, and he decided to call it a day at work and went home. But when he saw her car on the drive, his blood turned cold. He knew something was wrong. So he went into the house, and it was deathly quiet. And I can only imagine what must have been going through his mind. He went up straight to their bedroom, and on the bed was his wife's dead body. There was a pillow over her face, and he could see that 2 bullet holes were in the pillow. And he hadn't got the heart or the spirit to look for his kids. Because the house was so quiet, he immediately dialed 911. And when the police later asked him why didn't he look for the kids, he just said he was too scared of what he might find. His 2 children were found dead. They'd been drowned, and they'd been placed in separate bathrooms. And Daniel was spoken to about the offence. Priscilla had been raped, and it was mentioned in court documents that semen was found at the scene, although back then they didn't have the DNA techniques that they do now. But it was fairly obvious there was a lot of forensic evidence. So Daniel was spoken to, but then he fled. And when they searched his house, just what a state he'd been living in, a really bad state, and with mattresses on the floor, not even a proper bedroom. And he'd been obviously abused and neglected, but they found lots of forensic evidence which linked him to Priscilla and her children's murders. So he ran for his life, and there was huge manhunt. And this was a small town, but they really pulled everything out of the bag to get him. They knew he was dangerous, they knew he was armed, and they knew he could kill again. And they called everyone out to help them, and there was a huge manhunt that took place over 48 hours. And in that time, he did actually stop one woman at gunpoint in her car and sexually abused her, and probably would have murdered her if she hadn't got away. He was caught by police hiding in a dustbin. And it does make you wonder, he seemed to like these little crawl spaces, and it just goes to show you his state of mind. Was it something that he did, just curl himself up into the smallest ball and hide somewhere because maybe as a child that's how he felt safe? Or was that something that was forced upon him? Even when he was in school, the psychiatrist said that his personality had changed apparently because he'd had his head smashed against a lamp, and that had changed the way he functioned. And the mind boggles the sort of upbringing he had. So after Daniel was arrested, They brought him back to the station and then discovered that a gun had been hidden in his crotch all along. So things could have got even worse, but at least they had him in custody by now. So Daniel was convicted of life imprisonment and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. He has tried for parole several times and it's all been rejected by the High Court. He's made this heartfelt apology to the family, saying how sorry he is about what he did. But his forensic psychiatrist in prison has said he is not remorseful for his crimes. So what do you think of this story? Is it enough to keep you awake at night? Oh my goodness, I was staring at my walls last night, hoping I wouldn't hear any sounds. It is so tragic though. And I mean, for those poor girls to be going through the loss of their mum and have to go through all that, and then to find out that he's gone on to murder a whole family. It was something he obviously had planned all along, and something he probably had planned for Annie and Jessica too, had things not turned out differently. I am sure if he was released from prison, he would go on to kill again. And it also leads to another debate. I mean, I wrote a book called Truth and Lies, and it's the nature versus nurture debate, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But in the book, I wrote about a police detective who discovers that she was adopted as a child and her real parents are called the Beasts of Brentwood, the worst serial killers Britain has ever known. And it really makes her wrestle with her conscience as to why she's become a detective investigating serial killers herself. She wonders if she was drawn to it, if she's got bad blood in her veins, if she was destined to go one way or another. It is something that has fascinated me. And I think, although I don't feel sympathy for Daniel in any way, shape or form, you do think, gosh, if you were going to say, right, this is how you make a serial killer, let's do all these awful things to him and see if it happens. And certainly him torturing animals as a child is a huge clue. But are serial killers, or killers of any form, made, or do they just become them? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And if you've enjoyed this video or got value out of it, enjoy seems like a strange word, but if you've got value out of my video, please do subscribe, because I have some very strange and chilling cases coming up for the month of October and you won't want to miss them. Thank you so much for all the new subscribers who have joined me too. This is a new channel and I am improving every week. I promise I will get better, but I'm really encouraged by all the views and subscribes, so thank you. And if there's anything you in particular would like me to cover, then let me know. I always try and give a little bit of insight into the police as well with each video that I make, so if you have any questions or anything you'd like me to cover, then I'd be delighted to help out. So until next time, please don't be awake all night worrying about a person in your walls like I was. These crimes are very rare, so they don't happen very often. So sleep well tonight. Bye bye.